Morning mist clung to the banks of the Rhine in the spring of 1945. The war had ended, but the world still trembled with its aftershocks. A convoy of defeated German engineers was escorted across a river that once marked the heart of their industrial pride. Ahead of them rose a new American-built steel bridge, assembled in weeks with cranes that moved like clockwork. The metal still smelled of heat and victory. A 5-ton truck rolled over the deck. The bridge did not sway, it did not even whisper. Hans Kramer, a 42-year-old bridge designer from Essen, stepped closer and placed his hand on the cold girder. Vibration he expected never came. It doesn't move, he murmured in disbelief. The others fell silent, staring at the quiet defiance of the structure before them, a bridge that refused to acknowledge the exhaustion of war. Behind them, ruins smoked in the distance. Before them stood order, strength and confidence. In that stillness, a truth emerged clearer than the river below. The war was not won by louder guns but by steadier minds. There are bridges built to cross rivers, and there are bridges built to prove that intellect outlasts violence. The German engineers understood at that moment that they were touching more than steel. They were touching an idea that had survived the war untouched. If you value stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps preserve forgotten chapters of history. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it? There, the world of war had ended, but another kind of rivalry was just beginning, a rivalry of ideas. In one guarded compound outside Nuremberg, group of German engineers were asked to compare their bridge blueprints with those of their American counterparts. 2 rooms, 2 philosophies. In the first, the Germans worked with slide rules and drafting tables polished smooth by years of precision. Every bolt was calculated down to the millimeter. Every beam designed to bear exactly its assigned weight and no more. They saw perfection as strength. The bridge must be flawless or it must not exist at all. Across the hallway, the Americans were different in their sketches. The lines were bold, modular, simplified for mass production. A team of welders could assemble a truss in hours. If it breaks, one American joked while adjusting his helmet, we fix it by lunch. What looked careless to the Germans was in truth an entirely different faith in flexibility, speed, and human adaptability. While the German engineers debated torque equations, the Americans built with a rhythm that felt alive, the clang of rivets, the smell of grease and coffee, the laughter echoing off factory walls. They treated steel not as a symbol of perfection but as a living thing, capable of bending, healing, continuing. A U.S. instructor explained that a bridge should not aim for absolute rigidity. It should sway slightly in the wind, shift under weight, absorb and release stress. Like breath. To the Germans it sounded almost poetic, yet they saw proof in the statistics. The United States had erected over 200,000 bridges during the war, many assembled in weeks with failure rates less than 1 in 10,000. For the first time, the visiting engineers realized that strength was not the absence of weakness but the mastery of it. A design that allows movement will never fear collapse. The lesson struck quietly. What is perfect is fragile, but what can bend endures. The road to the Rhine wound through rubble and silence, until the black silhouette of the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen rose against the mist. Once it was the pride of German military engineering, twin steel arches crossing the river like an iron spine. Now it stood wounded, scarred by bombs, its center span warped yet somehow unbroken. In March 1945, when the U.S. 9th Armored Division reached it, they expected ruins. Instead they found the bridge still breathing, under fire. In smoke, American soldiers ran across, while German artillery tried to finish what demolition charges had failed to do. For 10 more days the bridge defied every prediction, carrying tanks, ambulances, and thousands of men into the heart of the Reich before it finally gave way. When the captured engineers were brought there later that summer, they stood in silence. One of them, Schenk, once assigned to calculate the bridge's load limits, stared at the surviving piers. We built it, he whispered, but they used it better than we ever imagined. His words carried no bitterness, only the strange humility of a man watching his own creation find purpose in the hands of the enemy. An American officer explained that temporary repairs, improvised decking, and flexible reinforcement had kept the bridge alive far longer than it should have lasted. That adaptability, that refusal to surrender to failure, was the true genius the Germans had not seen coming. Bridge became a battlefield and a classroom at once, where explosions had torn away the steel. New beams were bolted on within hours. It was no longer just German or American, it was a monument to persistence, a bridge that refused to die even as armies fought around it. In the engineers' notebooks, numbers gave way to reflection. The calculations of load and moment were replaced with something simpler, more human: endurance, cooperation, will. Standing on the bank, Kramer ran his hand over a surviving bolt and thought, perhaps for the first time, that no design truly belongs to its builder. Structure belongs to those who respect it, who keep it alive when the world tries to destroy it. And so, amid the ruins of a lost empire, the bridge of Remagen stood as proof. The great triumph of engineering is not domination but endurance. Late summer 1945. In a quiet testing yard near Topeka, Kansas, an unlikely experiment was underway. American engineers had invited several captured German bridge specialists to witness a series of stress tests on a new suspension design. Long steel cables stretched across wooden towers, and trucks loaded with sandbags rolled slowly over the deck. Every few seconds, instruments clicked and needles trembled. Hans Kramer stood at the edge of the span, eyes fixed on the slender steel threads vibrating in the wind. The bridge moved, not much, but enough to unsettle his instincts. For years he had been taught that movement meant weakness, that vibration was the first sign of failure. Yet here, under the Kansas sun, the Americans smiled at the sight of motion. An American officer handed him a small sheet of paper covered in data. We measure the shake, he said, to make sure it breathes. The phrase puzzled him. To make sure it breathes. Then he saw it. The bridge did not resist the stress. It let it pass through, transferring energy along its length until the tension dissolved harmlessly at the anchors. Every bolt, every joint, every cable shared the burden. It was in its own way alive. He felt the rhythm under his boots, a pulse steady and soft like the heartbeat of the earth itself. He realized the Americans had not conquered vibration, they had befriended it. The test ended with a roar of approval, not a single fracture. Kramer's companion Schenk turned and said quietly, "We built against nature, they build with it." In the camp that evening, Kramer drew a sketch in his notebook, a simple wave traveling through a bridge beam. Under it he wrote one sentence: "What knows how to tremble will never fall." That night the Germans lay awake, listening to the wind rattle the barrack windows. For the first time they understood that strength did not mean standing rigid, but knowing how to move and survive. And the next morning, as a new test began, Kramer stood taller, the fatigue of defeat slowly giving way to a silent admiration. Somewhere between the hum of engines and the shimmer of steel, he had discovered something that no battlefield could teach: that stability is not the absence of motion but harmony with it. Weeks later, the prisoners were taken to a bridge repair site near St. Louis. There, beneath the wide Missouri sky, they saw something that unsettled them more than machinery ever could. An American sergeant laughing as he taught a group of young engineers how to fix a faulty joint. The man used a wrench with easy rhythm, his hands stained with oil and dust. When a bolt snapped, he shrugged and said, "Good, now we'll do it better." The German observers exchanged glances. In their world, mistakes were punishable offenses, written into reports with shame and signatures. In this one, error was expected, even welcomed. That evening, over weak camp coffee, an American officer explained a phrase that had no true translation in German: forgiving design. He said it meant creating structures that would not collapse under small mistakes, systems that allowed human error without catastrophe. We don't expect perfection, he added, we expect correction. The words hung in the air for men who had lived under a doctrine where one miscalculation could mean a court-martial. This was revolutionary. Hans Kramer stared at his notebook for a long time before writing, forgiving it allows the bridge to learn from its flaws. They began to notice it everywhere: rivets oversized to tolerate misalignment, bearings designed to adjust under temperature shifts, beams curved just enough to absorb unpredictable loads. To the Americans, it was practicality. To the Germans, it was grace built into metal. One morning, Kramer overheard a foreman comforting young worker who had drilled a hole too wide. "That's all right," he said. "We'll patch it and move on. The bridge won't mind, the bridge won't mind." Such a simple phrase, yet it carried a philosophy of mercy they had never known. That night, as the camp lights flickered out, the men spoke quietly about the difference between fear and responsibility. Back home they had built under pressure, a command, a deadline, a threat. Here they saw another kind of power, creation born from trust, and somewhere deep inside they began to wonder if that was why America rose so quickly after every failure, because it was built both in spirit and in steel. To forgive. Tell me, viewer, have you ever built something in your life that forgave you when you got it wrong? The day was calm, the air smelling faintly of oil and sunwarm steel. At a temporary bridge site along the Illinois River, American soldiers worked beside captured German engineers to realign a misset girder. No officers barked orders, no flags flew. There was only the sound of rivet guns, boots scraping against beams, and the shared rhythm of breath between men who months earlier had tried to destroy each other. One sergeant handed Kramer a spanner, wordlessly trusting him to make the adjustment. The German crouched, checked the angle, and tapped twice with the wrench. The beam slid into perfect position. A soft metallic note rang through the structure, the kind of sound that told every man present the job was right. The Americans smiled and poured coffee from a thermos. Someone offered a cigarette. The conversation turned to bridge spans back home. One soldier from Iowa describing the wooden bridge near his family farm, another laughing about the one that flooded every spring. Kramer listened quietly, realizing that these men spoke of bridges the way others spoke of loved ones, something to be protected, to be rebuilt when damaged. By late afternoon, the river reflected the finished truss, a silver line stretching toward the horizon. For the first time, no one cared who had drawn the first sketch or who had set the first rivet. What mattered was that it stood. Shank wrote that evening in his diary. No command was given, no salute exchanged, yet we worked as one machine, beating in two languages. Americans never read his words, but they felt their truth, that there are moments when creation erases the memory of destruction. A single beam touched by two sets of hands can bridge more than a river. It can span the space between enemies, between fear and respect, between what divides and what endures. What do you think? Can cooperation born in defeat ever outlast the bitterness that caused it, or do such bridges exist only in moments like this, under the brief kindness of a quiet sun? Autumn 1953. The Rhine flowed calm again, mirroring a new Europe that was rebuilding itself. From the dust on its western bank, an elderly man leaned against the railing of a bridge that gleamed in the morning light. It was a civilian span this time. No soldiers, no checkpoints, only bicycles, children, and the hum of passing cars. The man was Hans Kramer. His once black hair turned silver. Beside him stood his grandson, a boy no older than 10, clutching a toy made of scrap metal. The child asked, "Grandfather, did you ever build bridges like this?" Kramer smiled, his eyes tracing the perfect arcs of American influence design, prefabricated sections, shock-absorbing joints, and expansion plates designed to move with the wind. He placed his hand on the railing and said softly, "Yes, but back then we built them to endure bombs, not to carry families home." The boy tilted his head, puzzled. Kramer continued, "I once hated the people who taught me how to build like this, but this bridge," he patted the railing, "this bridge taught Me that the strongest thing isn't steel. It's respect he watched as a line of workers crossed, their laughter carried by the river breeze somewhere below. The water rippled against the piers, they same river that had once been choked with debris and fear. The sound was familiar but no longer sorrowful. It was steady, forgiving, alive. A train horn echoed in the distance, and for a moment he imagined the clang of rivets, the hum of engines, the voices of men speaking two languages over the roar of molten steel. He thought of Shank, who had returned to teaching in Dresden, and of the Americans who had trusted him with their tools and their silence. As the sun climbed higher, the bridge seemed to shimmer with memory. It stood firm yet gently swayed, a living thing, not frozen in time but breathing with it. When they walked away, Kramer glanced back one last time. The bridge neither trembled nor stood still. It simply existed, balanced between motion and calm. Past and future, the war had collapsed nations, but the bridges of understanding once built refused to fall. Years later, when the world had moved on and history books reduced entire wars to a few pages, a handful aging engineers would still remember the sound of those American bridges, not their silence but their pulse. They would recall how the steel sang when trucks passed, how the cables trembled in the wind, and how every vibration carried the echo of something larger than architecture. It was the sound of survival, of learning to live with imperfection. Hans Kramer died in 1964. A quiet man with calloused hands and shelves filled with sketches that no one fully understood. Among his notes, his daughter found one drawing labeled simply "Bridge Forgiving," beneath it a line written in careful script: "We once built to resist, now I build to endure." It was not a technical note, it was an epitaph for an entire generation of engineers who had watched their world collapse and then learned how to build again. The bridges they studied and repaired after the war became silent teachers. They showed that strength is not born from domination but from understanding that a structure like a nation survives not by refusing to bend but by learning when to yield. And in every beam that could flex without breaking, there was a lesson about humanity itself. On quiet evenings long after the factory shut down, Kramer's grandson would walk across that same bridge over the Rhine. The steel would hum under his footsteps, carrying the rhythm of two worlds that once fought, now fused by the same laws of balance and grace. He would stop midway, feel the wind, and know that somewhere in the deep heart of the structure, between the bolts, the rivets, and the cables, his grandfather's understanding still lived. Because wars may end and empires may fall, but the bridges built with respect, they never truly stop standing.